Mazel tov.
And Lynn and Aaron Trumpka on the birth of a granddaughter.
Mazel tov, mazel
We
tov.
have 2 girls, so we'll take the boys from the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
If you're talking about a shidduch or something 20 years from now. Of course, we have, I'll do the condolences last. We also have Refuah Shlema, so please raise your hand and I will call Yale.
Chaim Ben Rashi.
Chaim Ben Rashi,
Okay, and also Rabbi Hyatt should be,
David Meir Ben Chayat Sipa,
all right, thank you. Michael,
Prosper Ben Aliza,
Oscar Ben Eliza,
Zora Bas Esther,
Rabas Esther,
Marissa Bas Toby.
Marissa Bas Toby.
okay, other Refuah Shlemas. I have a tendency to interrupt the shiur when somebody comes late, but
No, I
I'm
know.
trying to keep it as a minimum, unless somebody comes in close to the starting point.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll mention it at the end of it.
I think Irv always mentions Latam Lalon Ben Shenet Zipporah,
Right.
Yehuda Leib Ben Malka, Chana Bas Leah, and Chava Bas Esther.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. I have 2 names, Rave Binyamin Raphael Ben Rayut
Rabbi Binyamin Raphael Ben Rayut,
and Gonan Ben Dalia,
Gonen Ben Dalia. Ushalema. It's all the Chayim.
or Shlema.
That's right.
Next category, yard sites this week. Okay, then if there are no yard sites, I want to mention the obvious, very, very tragic condolences to the Katz family, Menashe and Seth, on the passing of their dear father, Howard Katz, Oliver Shalom. The Shabbos shorts are online. You can get the details of Zoom sessions with them. But all I can say is, I can't say enough words for somebody who did so much and was so dedicated to the whole community. Not everybody knows that he ran the part of the Chevra Kadisha in terms of doing Shmira. When somebody passed away, he would stay with the nifter like a whole night, and did this for probably 50 years.
Jay, with both of my parents, Aleichem Hashalom, he was right there for me with instructions how to get to New York, who to contact. I mean, in detail with both of them, checking on me. I can't say enough about him.
Yeah,
We've all had been touched by him in one way or another, and his passing, of course, is tragic to all of us. But his what he spawned, and even in terms of his sons who are here and the others, their mantra of chesed is a legacy that will be definitely left. So our heartfelt condolences to the whole family.
And something near and dear to my heart, he was the president of both Shomrei Emunah and Southeast Hebrew Congregation, on top of everything else he did.
Really?
He really gave a lot to the community. He really did.
Wow. Yeah.
I see,
Right.
Jay Marcus, you have a Refuah Shlemas. You're muted right now.
Yeah, no, I need to come back because my video wasn't working.
Stop.
Is that for Refuah Shalema, David?
All right. Shoshana Bat Yocheved,
Shoshana Bas Yocheved,
Yosef and Sarah,
Yosef ben Sarah,
Rav Reuven Pinchas ben Yehudit,
Reuven Pinchas ben Yehudit,
Rivka Malka Bat Matil.
Rivka Malka Bas Matel.
Thank you.
Can I please add Chaya Riva Bas Yehudis Devora?
Riva Bas Yehudit Devora.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else, no other hands. There, you have some Refuah Shlema? Joe? No? Okay. So I think, Rabbi, we should start.
Okay, very good.
Thanks again for Scott for setting the whole thing up. And
Yes, absolutely, Scott. Thank you, of course. All right, Yud Samid Aleph. We're about maybe 6 or 8 lines from the top. So we concluded last week in the discussion of the Gemara as to when you we have the situation where the get was lost in the base medrash, and Rabbi Baruch Chana, who was a big Talmud Chacham, was believed to identify it, and the Gemara just had a discussion there. We don't, and ultimately we don't know one of two reasons why the Gemara said that he was believed, either because he identified it with a special siman, or even a regular siman, but because he was a Gaver Rabbah, meaning he was a special person, or because he just recognized the get, meaning all the details of the get, not anything special by way of an identifying mark, but all the details of the get. All right, so that's how we left it last week. And now we're starting with the Gemara, second to last word on the line, Gufa. Now we're going to go back to the Bryce that we had discussed. If you remember, there was a machlokes between Reb Zera and Rava as to what the focal point of the stira of our Gemara was, and Reb Zera introduced a Bryce. Then the Gemara went back and forth. Why does Reb Zera hold like Rava that it's a machlokes from the Mishnah? And they ultimately said because from the Bryce we have a clearer picture from which to to understand the machlokes. What is that Bryce? Now we're going to delve into the Bryce itself. So that's what Gufa. Let's look into the substance of the Bryce. What's the Bryce? The Bryce is.
What daf are we on? I'm sorry. What daf are we on?
Yud Testament Aleph,
Thank you.
about 8 lines or so from the top. Sorry, second to last word, Gufa. So now the Gemara is going to discuss that Bryce that Reb Zera mentions here as the machlokes to our Mishnah. What is the Bryce? The Bryce is Motza Get Isha B'Shuk. If a person finds a Get Isha B'Shuk, and a Shuk, of course, is in a place where caravans go because it's a public marketplace. So the Gemara, the Bryce says, Isman Shahabal Modeh Yaksel Isha. If the Baal is Modeh, that he wrote the get and meant to give it to her, and again, no special time associated with this, then Yaksel Isha. Ain a Baal Modeh. The Baal is not Modeh. In other words, he doesn't say that he meant to give it to her. But yet we have a get. We see the get is written. There's no question that the get is on its 4 corners is a valid get. But he's not Modeh that he gave it. We'll see what that means. Lo yachsa lo lezeh lo lezeh. So we said that why not? Either because if you give it to if he says I didn't give it and you give it back to the husband, then he can kind of later, if she really is divorced and she wants to collect the ksuba, and he says, take a look, I have the get. We didn't have a ksuba. She gave me back the get. So now the get is as proof that she collected the ksuba. So he can cheat her. He can cheat her on the ksuba. But yet we can't give it to her because if it isn't a valid get, she'll say, I have a get, I can marry. But in truth, she doesn't have a get. So she'll go ahead and marry and all kinds of complications will come out of that. So the Gemara says that if it's lost and the Baal doesn't admit to it, you don't return it to either lo lezeh lo lezeh. So now the Gemara is going to go into the focus of it. Isman Baal Modeh Mia Yachsel Isha. Question: if the Baal is Modeh, you say, oh, it's so simple. We're going to give it back to the woman because the husband is Modeh that he gave the get. No problem. Right? The Gemara, the same kasha we've had in the past. You recognize this kasha because we've had this kasha repeated oft. The leicha shema kosav litin b'nissen l'nosan lo tishrei. Why are we not afraid that the get was written in Nisan and the husband withheld the get for a period of 6 months and gave it to her in Tishrei? Right? Now, what's the din? The din is that in and of itself is not a problem. Let's just say that he wrote it, he put it aside, and he didn't give it. So that hiatus is not in and of itself a problem. What is the problem? The problem is, and Rashi will explain in a little bit more detail. When a wife comes into a marriage, she comes in with a dowry. She comes with her personal and also perhaps real property. In other words, her family bequeathed her property, and that property she brings into the marriage. The halacha is, if she brings it into the marriage, the husband has full rights to that property, meaning If it's land, he can farm the land, he can get the produce of the land, he can sell the produce of the land. He can't sell the land, but he can do everything from the land. From the land. Okay, now, here's the question. If he goes ahead and sells produce and all kinds of things from the land, after he writes the divorce in Nisan, then he gives it to the wife in Tishrei. What happens to the proceeds of the land between Nisan and Tishrei? Because the wife didn't get the get until Tishrei, which means the effective divorce is Tishrei. Meantime, he's been selling produce from this. It's called
Well, end of story. End of story. I mean, had he not given the get, there would never have been a get. It would just have been sitting in his safety deposit box, and then he thought about it, and he decided he cooled off. But so he has that prerogative, is what I'm saying.
Correct, but now the wife is going to come back, and she's going to get the get. When is the get dated? Nisan.
It's dated Nisan, but
hold on. The day, so when she gets it in Tishrei, she'll say, you know what? I've got to get dated Nisan. I'm going back to all the people my husband sold produce for 6 months, and I'm collecting it back because I'm going to show them that he did it illegally. He sold produce from my property from Nisan to Tishrei when I really have a get from Nisan, and here's the get.
In other words, the Havamina here is that even though none of this would have existed had he just kept it in his safety deposit box, right? He had that prerogative. He has to know perhaps that once he gives it now, she may have that right to say, wait a minute, look at the date. Okay.
Correct.
Hold on. Well, but there's a problem with the wife here. She doesn't even know any of this thing happened. She was living a normal life.
But she'll know today. She'll know today.
She's claiming something that she was not aware of, and it wasn't supposed to be aware because the husband didn't intend to give up the produce until he gave the get.
He wasn't sure. Exactly.
No.
Nobody here in those 6 months, if anything that's concerned, the normal process should still hold and nothing should change. And that's
you're right, except for the fact that once the wife gets the get in Tishrei, and she says, you're giving me a get, okay, I accept the get, but you have no rights to have sold my property for 6 months because she has a dated get. Remember, it's not anecdotal. She goes to the buyer of the produce and says, my husband illegally sold you produce from last Nisan, and here's the proof. Here's my get.
That get doesn't exist as far as the wife is concerned, and it doesn't change the marriage in any way, shape, or form.
No, but
that's the difficulty I'm having.
No, you're right. But she is now angry. She's angry that she got the get, and she says, you know what? I'm going to show him. I'm going to go to everybody that he sold produce from Nisan to Tishrei, and I'm going to show them my get. And my get on its face says Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and he bought it in Iyar and Tammuz and Av. I'm going to say he sold it illegally. You're right. She didn't get the get until later, but the person to whom the produce was sold doesn't know that. He knows nothing other than he bought bushels and bushels of apples in Tammuz, and he assumed that there was no word of a get. No one ever heard that he gave a get to his wife, so he's allowed to sell the nitzah malug. Now she comes with a get and is going to say, wait a minute. You didn't know about this, but I'm already divorced since this. So she is going to argue that.
But in effect, if she's arguing that my husband was a ganef,
he illegally sold my property.
And what would the rules of Geneva really apply here when there's nothing transferred? The get is in the safe deposit box.
No, but nobody. Again, we're now a year later. Okay. All we know, the facts in front of us, and you'll see how it gets a little bit more complicated in a minute to your point, because you're saying that since it was in a safe deposit box and nobody knew about it, therefore it didn't exist. Okay, you're right. It for all intents and purposes, you have to deliver a get.
It doesn't have any impact anywhere.
Correct. It has to be delivered. in order to be a good get, right?
Right, it would have been smart of him to change the date to today's date, but in any event, it didn't have any legal effect until this minute. Now, the fruit vendor didn't necessarily know that, but I'm saying it seems to me obvious he'd lose in court because it only took effect today.
Right. So these are all valid points. And I will grant you that in normal circumstance, when she receives the get, that's when the get is chal, not before. But now let's look at the Gemara and see what the problem is. Okay, you're right, but there is a complication. Let's go back to the Gemara. The Gemara says, the husband will sell peiros from Nisan to Tishrei, because of Benisan, and she, the wife, will take the get which was written in Nisan and received in Tishrei, and go around to all of the buyers, and she'll collect Shelo Kedin, because you made a good point. You said that the get didn't come until Tishrei. She has no right to collect from all of those people, right?
Yeah.
That would seem to be, even though it was written in Nisan, and she's going to show the buyer, wait a minute, look at this get. It says Nisan, not Tishrei, but you're arguing she didn't get it till Tishrei, right? Okay.
But
Now,
everybody knew that she was still living with the husband in the same house.
okay, another valid point. Now look at this. There is a machlokes in the Gemara in Gittin. Listen to this. There's a machlokes in the Gemara in Gittin up to when a husband can use the nichsei melug from his wife. What's the argument? Says the Gemara, he nicha lamanda omar. This is all good according to the one who says kibun shenosan ein of lagarsha shuv ein labal peirus shapir. It's good that he returns it to the wife, according to who? According to the Manda Omer that says that when a husband intends to divorce his wife, he no longer has rights to nichsei maluk. What does that mean? That means when the husband goes in to write the get, he's intending to divorce his wife. That's the end of his rights to nichsei maluk. He can't have his cake and eat it. He can't say, I'm going to divorce my wife, but until I get around to doing what I have to do, I'm still going to use or eat from the nichsei maluk. That is not proper. So according to that Manda Omar, nichsei maluk ended when? In Nisan. So Chaim and Jay, it didn't matter if she got the get in Tishrei. Nichsei maluk was already cut off in Nisan. He had no rights to sell it to others. Therefore, it's okay to return the get to her because she's not performing a fraud by going to all of the buyers and saying, my husband sold, my ex or a husband sold all this produce illegal, because it was illegal. He sold it illegally because it was illegal, since he no longer had rights to nichsei maluk from the date he intended to write the get. So now we understand that it's not so simple. There's a machlokes in Gittin when nichsei maluk ends. Does it end when she gets the get, or does it end when he essentially undertakes to write the get? So the Gemara is telling us, according to the Manda Omer, Kibun shenosan ein of lagarsha shuvei labal peirus shapir, then it's okay he returns the get to the wife. Because the wife will not perform a fraud if she goes to those buyers, because she's entitled to her nichsei maluk. Yeah, Jay.
So is there another factor here that when the husband writes a get, he has to hire a sofer, and there also have to be Adam. So there's 2 to 3 people participating in this.
We know about the get, right?
So that enough takes it into another category, because it becomes somewhat public that he's writing a get.
Right. No, that's a factor, of course. The Manda Omer who says that you can no longer eat nichsei maluk may have taken that into account, that it's starting to become a public matter because people are starting to talk about it. People,
Right.
Reuben is about to divorce Leah, blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden, right? So how appropriate is it for the husband now to continue to eat nifzei malug, and he's writing his wife the divorce? That's
What does the word milug mean?
lug. Okay, so we'll look at Rashi. Rashi says, okay, so let's go to the Rashis. We'll go there. V'lo nosen atishrei v'kol zman shelo nosen hoyelo lechol l'nimko pere nifzei malug shelo shetikna chacham l'bal lechol perish shel nifzei malug ishto shenoknu lo yerusha. So lug comes for the measurement. There was a measurement of a lug that the hold on. Okay, so the term malug comes from lug, which is a measurement that you weigh or can take from property. So he can sort of, so to speak, take or weigh her property, and he's entitled to that weight, to that property. That's a term. It's obviously an Aramaic term that they use for what we would call dowry, essentially.
But the point is, it's very conceivable that even if the get is still in the husband's safety deposit box, let's just say, and she finds out that he has a get that he hasn't yet given her. I mean, once he gives it to her, you're saying it's conceivable that even 5 months ago, that produce really belonged to her.
Because the machlokes there of Tanoim in the Mishnah there in Gittin is when should the husband no longer have rights to the wife's property?
Even though she's still not divorced and the get hasn't taken effect, that part of it may have taken effect, if you will, once he hands it. Once he hands it, you're bending time and you're going back in a time machine.
Right. As a practical matter, if he's undertaking to write the get and it takes him a month or two, and he should no longer be living with his wife. If he's already cast an eye that he wants to divorce, then there should already be a barrier of separation between them.
But he was living with her, and that tells us something, right?
Again, yeah. I mean, essentially, although I can't tell you this with actual practicality, but I believe that when a man comes to Beis Din and says, "I want to write a get to my wife," then the Beis Din would enforce that he should separate and no longer live with his wife because he's already cast an eye that he wants to divorce her.
But I'm thinking in terms of contemporary society, do you have to approach a Beis Din when you start this endeavor? Or can you go to your lawyer with attorney-client privilege and just say to him, your lawyer who you keep on retainer, you tell him, Jim, I'd like to write this because I'm conflicted about this situation. I may never use it, but prepare something in the event, get the document ready.
Well, but I mean, again, now you're talking about something strictly outside halacha.
Correct. I'm just wondering how it fits in, or in halachic terms, as you're seeing it here right now in the Gemara, you always go to Beis Din when you want to start the process.
Right. So today, maybe people are less tied to Beis Din. They may go to their lawyer and say, "I want to divorce my wife. Go ahead and handle it. Do what has to be done. I want to give her a religious divorce as well as a regular divorce. So you go ahead and be my shliach."
Start the process, and let's keep this between us for now. But I'm really serious about it. I'm conflicted, but just start the process.
Right. So according to that, what you just said, that's the machlokes in Gittin, that there would be Manda Amar who would say when he's already
starting the process,
then he should be cutting off the distance between them should now be sort of formalized, if you will, so that there should be no nifzei malug, there should be no relationship.
And whether this happened or not, he did indeed start the process. So she can come now on the date the get is served, and she can say, "Look, I'm entitled to this stuff because it's nichsei.
Right.
The Besdin
The
should
more
be asking,
complicated question becomes, what happens if he later changes his mind and says, I've reconciled, I'm not giving a get. You can reconcile after you say, I'm undertaking a divorce. You can always, right? There's always a reconciliation.
But she's only coming to the fruit vendor, to the guy who sold the fruit.
When she gets the get.
Right, so then can he then say afterward, well, yeah, but she has the physical document, but I changed my mind. Is that what we're
Well,
So if
saying?
he changes his mind, why don't you destroy the get in the first place? Why is
That's correct. The get should never have been given. Exactly right. The get can't be given and then you say, I changed my mind. If you've given that get, you've divorced her. She's now a gerusha. You then say, I changed my mind. The halacha is you can remarry her. You can remarry her, but there was a get. So it becomes complicated because she can no longer, let's say, marry a Cohen. You can marry her. The husband can remarry her, but she can't marry a Cohen because she's a gerusha. Unless he doesn't give the get, and the get is never finalized, and it's only finalized through delivery, right? He has to receive it. Then it's a final get. If he destroys it before giving it to her, then the get never existed. There's a man Omer who says that he shouldn't eat nifse malug from the time he contemplates. Okay, so now that's a separate question which we're not addressing as to whether or not if he sold nifse malug, if he sold nifse malug from the time he contemplated until the time he was about to give it and then didn't give it, let's say 6 months passed, he didn't give the get and he tore it up. Is he entitled to the nifse malug for those 6 months, according to the Manda Omar, that he shouldn't have nifse malug when he already undertakes the get? That's
But why are we having this discussion? He tore it up. It was never physically given. She can never go to someone and say, I'm entitled.
Correct. But the Havamina is that he wasn't entitled to sell nifse malug when he contemplated giving it.
Oh, I see. In other words, nothing really happened. She's
Nothing
not
really-
divorced,
Right.
but she could still say, wait a minute,
You shouldn't have sold the nifse malug during that period of time. Although again, in our scenario, it becomes very complicated because if he retracts, then the period of time that he wasn't entitled to, l'chayra comes back to him because it never happened. Again, I'm hypothesicating according to that Manda Amar on something the Gemara doesn't really discuss. So let's put it aside for the moment. But you see how complicated it gets according to the one who says it's only about machshava, and then you have a machshava. So then there was no nifse malug allowed.
right.
Anyway.
Presumably
So
they're
why
estranged.
doesn't Besdin have the requirement to straighten this thing out right away when he comes for a get? They should be asking him questions just like a Besdin asks questions for other Chayiv Misa and all kinds of other things. They have a role here to prevent this from happening. And basically I was saying, unless you're going to give it tomorrow, we're not going to write a get. We're not going to let you hold a get for 6 months or till you decide what you want to do. Send him home.
especially if he's living with her?
Right.
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 So
Well,
send-
again, you're
send
right.
him-
If he's living with. So
Basically send him home. You send him home and say, come back when you really want to divorce your wife.
Okay, so obviously you're right that. But remember the scenario. This was not a centralized system. You went to a Besdin, and you could have gone to the Besdin of another town, and you brought aid in, and you did everything right. Now you go back to your town. The Besdin in the town that you wrote it is 100 miles away. You've now taken 4 days to get back home, and the presumption is you're going to give the get. You said, you know what? I'm going to hold on to this get. You put it into your safe deposit box. No one is the wiser. No one is the wiser, and life moves on. Now, okay, a month later, 6 months later, you give the get. The Besdin in the town that you wrote it is no longer shaykh to this because they're off from somewhere else. So now all you have to do is give the get. You're right. Today with centralization and computers and nices geschäften, today the whole thing is much more connected and you can control. But there was upon a time when that didn't happen. People wrote the get, then they sent it. Remember, you can send a get al Medina Sayyam and it can take 6 months just to get from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz or vice versa. So you see, as a practical matter, he didn't withhold the get. He just sent it, and it took a long time. Then 3 months into the journey overseas, he says, you know what, I'm going to retract. Wait a minute. Oh my gosh, I got a shaliach who's already on his way to Chutz La'aretz. So he sends the Pony Express to overtake the first shaliach to tell him, don't deliver the get. The get is now invalid. He doesn't want the get to be given. Again, hypothetical scenario where the get is only complete when it's given. Now you have a machlokes between in the Mishnah and Gittin whether or not he's entitled to nichsei malug from the time he wrote it or from the time she gets it. So now in this practical machlokes, we see that there's a man d'Omer who says, wait a minute, you wrote a get, you're not entitled to anything anymore from her. May take 6 months to get the puts from over the yam, but you're not entitled to it. So therefore, again, in our scenario, again, you can create all kinds of side issues, and there are many. But for the purposes of nichsei malug, the problem with writing in Nisan and delivering, and she receives it in Tishrei, is according to the man d'Omar that says that once he gives his eyes to divorce, he can no longer take. It's okay that she gets it because she's fully entitled to the nichsei malug. But to the Ella, the man d'Omar, back into the Gemara, Yesh Labal Paris Achos Nesina. According to the man d'Omar who says that the Baal is entitled to the Paris of nichsei malug until Nesina, until she receives it on her hand. My Ikalamemer. What are you going to say? What does that mean? What are you going to say? How can you say that if he says, yes, I gave the get, you can give it back to the wife? How can you give it back to the wife? She's going to go ahead and collect her nichsei malug for 6 months, and he's entitled to it.
Why is he entitled to it? He's not entitled to it.
I'm saying according to the other view, there's two views in Gittin. According to the view that he's entitled until she receives it, that he can eat nichsei malug during the period of Nisan to Tishrei. But she's going to commit a fraud because she's going to say, no, he's not entitled. She's going to say to the person who bought it, take a look. This poor guy is sitting also 100 miles away, and he's been buying from the husband for years. And she comes back and says, the last 6 months that you've been buying from my husband or ex-husband was invalid. And he's going to have to pony up all the money that he spent to give her back the nichsei malug. That's the problem. The problem is not according to the man d'Omer who says that it ends at the moment he conceives to give her a get, that if she comes with the get, and even if she receives it 6 months later, there's no fraud, because truly she's entitled to her nichsei malug from Nisan. But according to the one who says that she's not entitled until she gets it, she's going to take that get, show it to the buyer, and say, you've been getting illegal fruit from my husband for 6 months, pay me back. And he'll have to pay her back. That, says the Gemara, is the problem. According to that view, that she's not entitled. She's not entitled to the nichsei malug. Only from the day that she gets the divorce, she will perpetrate a fraud on the people who received it. That's the Gemara's kasha. So how can you say in that Mishnah, oh, no problem. If the husband admits that he wrote a divorce, you return it to the wife. If you return it to the wife, she's going to defraud those purchasers. That's the kasha. Not according to the one who says that he's entitled. According to the one who says he's not entitled to nichsei malug, he's going to defraud all the purchasers between Nisan and Tishrei. That's what the Gemara's kasha.
Rabbi, why is she going to defraud? If he's already going there to file a divorce, just because he didn't give it to her, let's say the scenario that it went across the ocean, what's the difference? 6 months later, he still intended to divorce her. So why should he benefit from her property? And why she's not lying the fact that, yes, I didn't get it, or I did get it, because if it's made known that the divorce is valid at any point that he gives it to her or she receives it.
Right.
But if he already went ahead and had it written, then from that moment on, he cannot benefit from any of her assets, because it's as if she was standing next to him right then and there, they would have been divorced.
Correct.
So,
Right. So you're 100% right in your thinking. But now let's stop a minute. We're saying that in that Mishnah, there is a dispute between two Tanoim when, in effect, his rights to her property end. It's not so simple. One view of one Tana says, you know, when his rights end, his right ends the minute he contemplated writing the divorce, he no longer has rights to her property. If he sold her property from the time he contemplated until he gave it, it's illegal, and she has a right to go back and collect her property because he no longer had the right to sell it. But there is another view in the Mishnah. The other view in the Mishnah is no, that the right of a husband to eat his wife's property extends to the moment she receives it. If it takes 6 months to cross the Yam, so be it. If he puts it in a safety deposit box for 6 months, so be it. It doesn't matter. If she doesn't have it, he has a right to it. Now, you may say that's wrong, that's not a right approach, but that's the machlokes in Gittin. So the kasha is this. We say in this Mishnah that if a get is lost and then it's found and the husband says, sure, I meant to give it to my wife, we give it to her, no questions asked. Frek the Gemara, why is that okay if he wrote the get in Nisan and gave it in Tishrei, or he sent it overseas? In our example, let's say hypothetically, he sent it overseas. It didn't get there for 6 months. Why should he have the right to continue eating from her property, according to the one who says that he has according to the one who says he has that right? Yes, you have a right, husband, to eat until she gets the get. Now, when she gets the get, she says, oh my gosh, 6 months ago, my husband wrote this get. I'm only getting it now. What's the date of the get? Rosh Chodesh Nisan, today is Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. Okay, so be it, I'm divorced. Then her friends and family tell her, you know what? Your husband has been eating from your property back home where he lives for 6 months. And she says, that's not fair. Why would he have a right to do that? The answer is because he follows the view in the Mishnah that says he has a right to eat nichsei malud for 6 months. He has that right. He did nothing wrong. And so she says, you know what? I don't accept that. I'm going to go back to my hometown and I'm going to go to all of the buyers of the produce and I'm going to demand my produce. And so then her family says to her, but you can't do that. He didn't do anything wrong. He ate until you got the get. And she's going to say, I don't care. I want my produce back. I'm going to go to everyone who bought the produce. I'm going to show them this get. They will not be the wiser. They don't know from anything. What do they know about a get? I'm going to show them a get. I'm going to tell them, you know what? You have illegally been eating my fruit because my husband had no right to sell it because I was divorced in Nisan. Truly, she wasn't. She was divorced in Tishrei because that's when she got the get, but nobody knows that. So all they will see is the get itself. And therefore, they will go and say, you know what? Sorry, we're going to have to repay. So she will perpetrate, according to the Manda Omer, that the husband had the right to eat the fruit for 6 months. She will perpetrate a fraud by collecting 6 months back, because according to that view, she had no right to the produce. You're right, David, according to the Manda Omer that says he has to stop eating in Nisan, he has no rights. Then, okay, then it's okay that she gets the get because she has every right to collect. But according to the view that she has no right to collect, how can you give her the get in Tishrei when she was really divorced in Nisan, and now she's going to go back and perpetrate a fraud on all those people who bought fruit from Nisan to Tishrei? That's
Rabbi?
the Pasha. Yeah.
And I would say that Tana that says that the get is not finalized until she actually receives it.
Right.
I guess philosophically that goes along with the line that we're always hoping that they will remain married. So as you said before, he may send a shaliach and he's sending him abroad. He says, wait a minute, what a huge mistake. and he sends out the Pony Express and to catch him. If we hold by the Tana who says that from the moment he thought about the get, they're divorced.
No.
He doesn't have a chance to take it back. Is my point. If we hold by the Tana who says that only when she receives the get is the get finalized, then we're giving the Baal the opportunity the entire time to undo it, to stop it. I mean, I'm just thinking that's what the Tana's thinking is.
But why didn't he go and null it with the Besdin or the court? You say, listen, I made a mistake. I can't reach her. I'm sending it out. The fact that he sent it out to him and they're looking and searching for her, let him annul it. Go back to the Besdin and say, listen, I canceled that. I had a change of mind. It doesn't exist. Then you would be eligible to it.
Well, the problem, David, is this. You know, in theory, you should be right. If he goes back to the Besdin and annuls it and says, I didn't mean to give it, but the fact of the matter is that this is a correct get. And since the only way to stop the get is for the get not to be given. What I said before was that if he, in his own mind, says, I made a terrible mistake, I should never have done this, then that alone doesn't nullify the get. The get can only be nullified if she does not get it. Once she gets it, she's divorced. His only recourse is to remarry her. And the Torah says you're allowed to do that. You are allowed to remarry the wife that you divorced. Of course, there are other halachas. If she remarries in the middle, whatever. But if he says, I made a mistake, I should never have done it, I want to reconcile, I have to stop this get. If physically I can't stop the get, she is a gerusha, and there are halachas of a gerusha that apply to her. He can remarry her, but she has now received the title of gerusha. No choice. We have no choice in the matter. Now, with regard to all these other halachas, that's when it becomes complicated.
Well, meanwhile, she's angry and she is going to go to these vendors. And again, according to the machlokes here, the question is whether she has a right to.
That's exactly.
But in any case, this is a full employment act for lawyers of the time, because she needs to go to court and
Here.
And all the vendors need to lawyer up, and this is just a mess. But it's full of
it's an absolute mess, and it becomes more complicated because of the machlokes as to when his intentions come in. That makes it even more complicated.
Right, but each side will argue according to which Manda Omar applies. That's
correct.
Right.
But what's the bottom line? The bottom line is, how can the Mishnah say, without reservation, that the husband gives, if he's maida, he gives it to the wife? According to that one Manda Amar, he shouldn't give it to the wife because she will perpetrate a fraud.
Okay.
That's the kasha. That's the kasha here. My ikalamemer, according to that Manda Amar, what are you going to say? How can you reconcile the husband giving it automatically to the wife when giving it to the wife means she can perpetrate a fraud? That's the kasha of our Gemara here. How could you unreservedly, without any reservation, say, yes, give it to the wife? If he's not, we say, if he's not maida, then you don't give it to either, because it's, why? Because we're protecting. Why aren't we protecting in the case where he is maida, according to that?
Right, because this scenario could still materialize. So
Correct.
Why is the Gemara so quick to say, let him be a good Samaritan and give it? Yeah.
Correct. Okay, so now let's take a look at Rashi. V'lo nosan at Tishrei v'chol zman shelo nosan hoyelo lechol limka pera nichse malun shelo shetiknu chachamim lebal. The chachamim established that the Baal lechol pera shel nichse malun ishto shenaflo lo Yerusha. He's allowed to eat her nichse malun, and he's going to continue to eat it. V'zavin pera kimishpata, he will sell according to the halacha. He's allowed to. Okay, then we say Shapir Yeshlo Litra Koma Shemocha Mishas Ksiva. She can go back and collect everything that he sold from the time of the writing, and that's the machlokes. Can he or can't she? Right? So we say, okay, so that's the kasha. My ikalamein. So now the Gemara gives a teretz here, and this teretz is going to open up all kinds of other issues. So, okay, what's the teretz? The teretz is ki asal and mitraf. You know how we're going to mitigate this problem? when she comes to collect, Omrina law, Aisaraya emes mata gitcha liyodcha. We're going to say that when she comes to collect her nechasim, her nichsei malug, we're going to say, please show us proof when you receive the get. Show us, tell us when you got the get. By instituting this one point, the Gemara says that will obviate any concern, because how was she going to prove she got the get in Nisan? She didn't. She got it in Tishrei. The shaliach who went overseas or whoever delivered the get, he has to be deposed, and he'll say, no, I gave her the get on Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. I gave it to right before Rosh Hashanah. So what is she going to say? So her collecting from her cheating those people, according to this, can't happen, because they were going to require her to prove when she got it. Right? Simple enough answer. Simple enough answer. You got to prove it.
Rabbi, it sounds like it was not a common practice to have the handing over of the get witnessed. You didn't have witnesses as a common practice?
No, you don't have to have witnesses for the Nesina. You have to have witnesses for the Ksiva. The Shaliach, remember, the Shaliach can say, are you Mrs. So-and-so? Yep, here it is. Like the newspaper delivery boy, he flips it into her yard with a dollar amas, and then he takes his bike and hightails it away. Nobody saw it. She received it. He knows when he delivered it, but nobody else will.
She has to be aware that it was dumped in her property.
No. Well,
He
again,
would need the guy who served her the get. Let's say a friend did it,
it's not like time. It's not like certified mail that she has to sign for it.
No, but it's like a subpoena is served. You want to avoid being served the subpoena, but once the doorbell rings and you open the door, the guy hands it to you.
Or drops it
up.
He will affirm
Because
that
it's
he did
chatzar.
that. He will affirm that he did that, but now what she needs to do is get him to certify that he did so. She needs proof.
If he doesn't get her,
Yeah. She needs proof of the date. That's reasonable.
That's correct. She needs to say, I was served on such and such a day, and I will show it to you that it was that.
And she will do that by furnishing some proof.
So,
She'll
but when it comes to giving the get, it's just eid echad.
That's it. Just to the deliverer.
Just to the deliverer, and it just has to be in the chatzar. It doesn't have to be.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's all it has to be.
And if she can't find that guy or can't furnish proof,
right,
she's out of luck.
Exactly.
Right.
That says
burden proofs on her.
Says the Gemara. That's why we're not worried about her receiving the get, even according to the Manda Omar. Even according to the Manda Omar, that it's Mishas Nesina, and you worry that she's going to go ahead and cheat the Lekuchos from Nisan. Not going to happen, because she has to show, did I get it in Nisan? Did I get it in Tammuz? Did I get it in Tishrei?
Nowadays, the woman has to accept the get, right? You just can't throw it in her.
Well, again, today we do it, quote unquote, a little bit more civilized. That it should be, she should agree to the get. And again, the halachas are a little bit more stringent. But al pi halacha, al pi the Torah, she doesn't have to. I mean, he can throw it in her in Dalet Amos and go away, and she's stunned that you got to get. I mean, so these are all issues, because she doesn't have to be at the writing. She does not have to be at the writing of the get. So this is the practical question. She doesn't know about the get because the get is being written without her knowledge. Today, that's not so much the case. Today, the Beis Din wants the parties to come in because they want formally, did you try to reconcile? I mean, it's a little bit more of a procedure, but nevertheless, the halacha still stands. The deraisa, it's the Rabbanan who issued the takana. Okay, so so now we've answered the kasha. Frank the Gemara, if that's the case, that she has to prove when she received it, why is a get different than a shtar chov? A shtar chov is a document that shows that, let's say you owe me $100, I lent you $100. It's an obligatory shtar, and we have a different outcome. What is that? The Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Motza shtar chov. If someone found a shtar chov, let's say the same circumstance, a guy is driving in the marketplace and he looks down, sees a piece of paper, and he's curious and picks it up, and he sees a shtar chov between Reuben and Shimon. Zok the Gemara, and this is our Gemara and Daf Yud Beis. Im yesh behen achrayus nechasim, if there is a clause that allows to collect, that the creditor can collect from third parties, right? Achrayus nechasim, lo yachsim, you don't return it. And in our Gemara, we said that the chayiv was moda. He admits that he sold it to the third party. And we have a clause that says the creditor can collect from the third party, and we don't allow it. We don't allow it, says the Gemara. Why? If you remember, that's when we were first introduced to this concept. He wrote the Shtar Chov in Nisan, but he didn't lend him the money till Tishrei. So 6 months went by when he did not yet lend the money. There was no Chov. So the Gemara is going to say, the Kotar of Lekucha Shalo Kedin, same problem, that if you allow the Shtar Chov to happen, that in that 6 month period where there was no halva, if he sold property, the debtor sold property to a third person, which should be totally inviolate to the creditor, all of a sudden the creditor is going to say, wait a minute, Mr. Purchaser, I have a right before you. I have a document that says I can collect from the debtor's property, and he sold you a property, I get it. But in truth, he shouldn't get it because the halva didn't happen until Tishrei. So we say, no luck, you can't return it. In fact, the Gemara, wait a minute, in Gittin, we just said you can return it, right? Why can't you return it in Shtar Chov? Powerful question. It should be the same circumstance. And the reason we gave is because he's going to have to prove, she is going to have to prove when she got it. Why don't we say the same thing here? So the Gemara gives a very interesting answer, which you may find satisfactory, but there's some issues with it. Zak the Gemara, the Gemara, Hosam Nami Lahoder. Let him also return. That's the end of the kasha. In other words, why are we worried? Let's say, no, it's okay. Because when the guy comes to collect after 6 months, they're going to say to him, show me that you when you got the shtar. If you didn't get the shtar, that means there was no loan. That means all of the lekuchos are safe. They're all safe. You can't collect from them. If you show me you got the shtar in Nisan, then I'll say, right, okay, now you can't collect. But if you didn't get it until Tishrei, then you can't collect from those lekuchos who bought between Nisan and Tishrei. So that's the Gemara's kasha. It's the same kasha. So let's go and take a look. Rashi. So we asked, when did the get come miyad ba'alecha? When did it come to your hand? So we asked the same kasha here. When did you get the shtar? Same situation. Why is one different than the other? So that's the kasha of the Gemara. All right. So now the Gemara is going to come to give us an answer. Omrei, no. We're going to say that there is a chilik between get and shtar chov. What's the chilik? Hocha gabe get isha. By get isha also lokeach v'tove oma hayda hadven nehele rabbanan legita mishalum tagen v'teise hashtadika asil mitref tezel v'teise re'iyah emamata gita liyada. In essence, this is what's going to unfold in the case of a get. Okay, the whole circumstance comes, and the creditor, or the reason why we have to protect, in the case of get, why we have to protect the lekuchin is because the lekuchin, those buyers, will never question what Bezdin did. Why? What is the most important thing in giving a get? I mean, you could say it's protection for the lekuchas. It's all these other things. But these
has to be free will. You can't have
right
conditions.
But what's the most important thing that we protect with a get? We protect
Women can
remarry Ashes Ish. So in other words, from the standpoint of the holiness of the union, we have to protect that she has a correct get, can remarry and her children can be kosher Jews. That's the single most important thing about a get. Now, there are ancillary issues such as lekuchos, creditors, debtors. Those are important, but they don't rise to the level of the fact that she has to be properly divorced. So this is what the Gemara says. In the case of a get, a lokeya, in other words, someone who lent money will see that, okay, she got the get. Now, she got the get, where do I come in? Okay, in other words, do I collect anything as a result of that get? So he'll say to himself, you know what? I'm going to challenge it because the whole point of the get was to protect her and to so she can properly remarry. But in other words, what the Gemara is saying is that people will understand that the Bezdin of the whole process of Gittin wasn't as precise with regard to Lekuchos because it was solely focused on the issues, the Ashes Ish part of it. That's the psychological interpretation that our Gemara is giving. That in the case of get, people will ask, what about my protection for my money? Because the whole focus was just on the issues side. So Bezdin was never makbid on whether or not the dates were correct or was properly delivered. I'm going to challenge the get. That's what the Gemara is telling us. That the Gittin is different than shtar chov, than regular commerce, because by Gittin there is one focus. That's the focus of ishus, meaning that she's properly divorced from a remarriage standpoint, and the others, okay, yes, yes, no, no. So if that's the case, I'm going to come in and challenge and say, wait a minute, how are you allowed to collect from the Nixay Malog or not? That question will come to the fore immediately because people will say, you know what, Bezdin never focused on that. I have to protect my own rights. So the question of when was the get given will come to the surface. That is what the Gemara is telling us. Okay, it will definitely come to the surface because we're going to ask the question: was the get proper or not, and for that purpose. So again, let's look at the language. Hacha gabi get isha also lokeach b'tovim. The buyer, in other words, the person who bought the nichsei malug will argue tava. He'll come and claim Oma. The reason why the rabbis were particular on get, that she should properly not remarry or not remarry. Now that I'm coming to collect, let's investigate, right? When did it come into our hand? So in other words, we're going to be makbid on when it came into our hand. That's in the case of a shtar chov, we're afraid that the buyer will never come to protest before the court. What's the proper date? Why? Because they see that the rabbis gave the shtar back. Pshita, it's simple. Why did they give it back? So he's not going to come and argue it because he's going to rely on the Bezdin. You know what? The Bezdin must have seen correctly to give it back to the creditor. Therefore, I have no choice. Probably he's entitled to it. So what the Gemara is telling us, which by the way, may or may not be the way today, people actively participate in commerce. Because today, if you are involved in commerce, you're going to be very, very careful that your money is protected, especially if it's large sums of money. You're not going to say, the courts probably did the right thing by giving it back because I'm not entitled to it. No one says that today. It's immediately challenged. But in the time of the Gemara, they're saying that when people relied on the Bezdin, if the Bezdin did something, they're going to say, Bezdin, we rely on you. So in the case of Gittin, they're going to say, you know what? The whole focus of the get was that it should be properly written, so the wife should not be an Eishes Ish, but they didn't focus on anything else. Therefore, when she comes to collect the Nixon Malug, we're going to say, Mrs. So-and-so, show us that you got the get before we give it to you. In the case of Shtarei Chov, says the Gemara, psychologically, people are going to say, we rely on the Bezdin. Because there's no ulterior motive. It's all about Mekach and Memka. So if the Bezdin gave the shtar to the creditor, Mistama, he deserves it. And people aren't going to protest. Therefore, we can't rely on the question of when did you get it, because they may never ask it because they're going to rely on Bezdin. So in the case of get, we can rely that they're going to ask that question. In the case of Shtar Chov, they won't ask the question. That's why I say it's an argument, and it definitely shows the difference. But again, applying our current day principles, it's a little bit strained to the imagination that in the case of commerce, people are just going to rely and say, no, okay, I believe you. If there's a lot of money at stake, you have to believe that they're going to argue. Show me when you got it. But the Gemara says in those days, that was a valid chilek. Therefore, Shema Mina, Kamarabanam, Kibilsa, Mekabidide, Motishtar, Liyade. So therefore, the Gemara now says it's no stira between Gittin and Shtar Chov, because by get, the creditors will always ask the question, and by Shtar Chov, they won't ask the question. So let's take a look. Also, the Keach B'Tove. So look at that one Rashi. Also, the Keach B'Tove. Also, the Mitraf Masik Adate Litzvoa. Aisiraya Emes Mota Git Chaliyotra B'Zman Kama. In other words, the creditor, the one who bought the Nichse Melug, will always have it on his mind to ask that question because he knows that the Bezdin was solely focused on the get portion, on the Eishes Ish portion. Therefore, they may have been lax in the other. I have to defend my own rights, and I have to get it. So, okay, so that's now the distinction between the machlokes. Actually, we should go further in Rashi, just a little bit further. Mekamididi, Mekodim Shemochali Halove, Nechosav Motashtor Miyad Love Lamalva Berishona. So what do we say? Hini Chalamanoma, Pluktim Gittin, Chusu. Okay, no, so this goes into the next tomorrow. Okay, so basically we've answered the question that there's no stira between Shtar Chov and Shtar Get, because by a get, it's solely focused on the one aspect. Therefore, it's valid to say that we challenge the wife to show us when she got the get, and that will be a valid issue. But in the case of Shtar Chov, it will never happen because they won't challenge the Shtar Chov. They'll say, oh, we rely on Bezdin. And if Bezdin found that the creditor was correct, then we can't argue. So that's the distinction. And that's how the Gemara prevents the machlokes. So it's an interesting question because in our times, I mean, as a businessman, we would always say, wait a minute, if it's a small amount of money, maybe not, but a large amount of money, then l'chayra, there would be a challenge. And if there is, there is. But the Gemara is saying that in those days, they didn't really focus on that. They relied on Bezdin. So again, different times, so we have to adjust differently. But it's a fascinating Gemara. And there are other ramifications to this, which the Gemara doesn't deal with. And I think we discussed it fairly thoroughly this morning. What are the other things that arise from this, which when we get to Gemara and Gittin, Mitzvah, I think the Gemara and Gittin will elaborate a lot more on those issues.
Sort of applied psychology, although they wouldn't have called it that in those days.
They wouldn't have called it that, right? But it maybe it was just a practical solution. How people lived in those days is that there was a high degree of trust with Bezdin, right? They actually we see that from other Gemaras where we say that once Bezdin has its imprimatur, then you never have to worry because the Bezdin did the worrying for you. Today, unfortunately, courts are much more vulnerable to challenge. We know that. So it's a different thing. But in those days, if the Bezdin said it, everybody believed it. So in the case of Shtar Chov, if the Bezdin said it, no one will challenge and that could be a problem. That's why you're not allowed to return the shtar chov, but you're allowed to return the get.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach. So Mitzvah next week.
Rabbi Grauman,
Yes.
I see this slightly differently in the sense that the issue with the get here is it's to the Beis Din and everyone else, it's of a higher priority than the issues of promissory notices or torts or anything like that. And so
Correct.
therefore, we first deal with the issue of the individual, the woman, and whether or not she is divorced, and then we will let everything else cascade out of that. So therefore, first priority is take care of the issue of the get, and then out of that, everything else will cascade, and eventually we'll
Correct.
those problems
Absolutely
out
correct.
afterwards. So this is of the highest priority. Everything else is of much lower priority.
And because
We'll work
everybody
out
knows
later.
it. No, but Joe, because everybody knows what you said is correct, they'll challenge the other part because they know that the priority is really the get, not the ancillary commerce. Therefore, people will be more attuned to challenging the commerce because they'll say Beis Din didn't really focus on it.
Correct.
But in a case of commerce, where the whole thing is commerce, they're going to say, okay, Beis Din said it. They must know what they're talking about. We're going to rely. So they won't challenge it.
Yeah, and that's the difference in nuance between what you were saying and how I was thinking about it.
Right. But in today's society, can you say the same thing? Can you say today that people won't challenge something that the Beis Din in a commerce situation?
Well,
Commerce is
today people would argue that whether the issue of a get should be the highest priority.
That's even true as well. That's true as well. So, but you see the differences. But yes, in the time of the Gemara, you're 100% right that it's the highest priority. Therefore, everything else can be challenged. In the case of commerce, it's all sort of equal, and therefore the Beis Din says yes. Everybody says yes. Nobody thinks to challenge if the Beis Din said yes on a matter of commerce, which was the highest priority in that case. Absolutely, that's correct. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Sei gesund, everybody. Have a good week. Mitzvah Shem next week.
Thank you.
Shkach.
Yeah. Chaim Shkach. Yeah.